So, how many terms is this for you?
How's what?
How many terms are you
I'm in my second term. Yeah, second year, my second term.
Do you guys have terms?
No.
You guys, are you sure?
No, we looked at it, and I don't mind it, but Richard Portman was forcing it on us. No.
Good. Yeah, we
Back.
rebelled. Well, that's to be sheriff and, because we put on our
Oh, well, see, my sheriff was wanting to be in charge. Yeah, and I think my sheriff was going to be trying to be the mayor. Strong mayor. Is there coffee back here?
I think there is.
How's your son doing?
Okay, well, it was coming this way.
Oh my God. Hey.
Yeah, it's the 99 Co Road. 99 Co, C-O-E Road.
Yeah.
I thought about that after we got off the phone the other day. It's like, oh, don't send it to 16 Gulf Boulevard because I don't get the mail there, but I have a tenant who does. So I thought, well, if it came, then maybe he would let me know. And I was down there yesterday, and all looks good, so I really appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
How are you?
I'm good.
Busy?
I'm leaving to go to California.
You have a
Huh?
new grandchild.
Right.
Relatively new grandchild.
Yeah, she'll be about 5 months old. Hi, Sue. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
We're making sure we put everything up front that's important because we know you have to leave early.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Make sure we get the important stuff up front because Karen has to believe.
Yeah, well, I said I was up at 6 this morning, and I was like, I'm going to be here on time, and then it was like, one thing happened, and I was finally like,
Who was taking the
really?
I know.
Like my son, that's all he lives for.
I packed last night, everything should go smoothly, and then
Which
it
one
was
was me?
Then as I was walking out the door, I was like, oh, that's right. Somebody called me yesterday and they needed some information, so I had to go find the file. I was like, ah.
Which one's Cliff?
I'll show you some pictures of my son. All the fishing. That's what he does. He loves to spearfish.
So thank you, Sue.
So I just got it.
So when you head to California?
My flight's at 1.
Hello.
Hi there.
Yeah, so I'm leaving here at
How are you?
11:50.
I'm doing all right.
I want to thank you.
Well, I'm kind of doing like this.
Host of our next board meeting in
I'm going
County.
to.
Okay. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah,
My girlfriend going.
What day is it?
It's like, hey, what's on my calendar today?
Okay.
If we didn't have the phone, we wouldn't know.
with Marianne and with Ann at the
And she'll stay there
convention
a couple
center,
nights.
so we're getting everything
Oh, we're going to be at the
solidified.
convention center. Okay.
I think we're going to be in the Longboat Key Room.
Leave there April 6th and fly to
Yes,
DC.
so,
See my other son.
yeah, we're going to be heading down your way next
husband
week.
Good. And I won't have to
for the
drive
weekend.
so far.
I figured, if I'm going across country, I might as well stop in DC on the way home, right?
Far out. Well, that'll be fun.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna save it as a
I'm looking
favorite.
forward to
So
it. That was,
it's
hey, that was
pretty
good
noticeable
that
when I
the,
get to it.
Tampa Chamber,
colors are
St.
so
Pete
vivid.
Chamber, right? The
I've got to clear out so many of these.
Did you see
Okay.
it?
Okay, so
It was
here's the
good.
first one.
Yeah.
I know Chris.
And they had the young professionals.
What is that?
host.
What is that?
The Tampa and St. Chamber chime in.
Yeah. Okay, what kind of fish is this if you're a fisherman?
Like, good.
It's not a grouper. It's a sail.
Hey, how you doing? I mentioned your
Oh, yeah.
stuff.
No, yeah. Gosh, what a beautiful picture.
I know. That's why I put it on.
That's
Hey, how you doing?
that's one of the coolest pictures I've ever seen.
You too.
Yeah, let me do
Good.
that too.
That is a marlin.
Oh, it's marlin. Okay. Yeah, black
That's a
marlin.
big one.
Right, well,
I
thank
know,
you
and
for being here.
spearfished it.
Appreciate it.
Good
And it started
Lord,
taking him
mercy.
down, and
I
he
can
worked
see
hard to
why.
bring
I
it
can
back
see
up.
why.
Well, it was ringing in his bag, and we didn't know whose it was. We were like, what's going on?
That is the coolest picture I think I've ever seen. I've never seen. Yeah, that's a huge black marlin.
How many units do you think you could get?
Gorgeous.
Black marlin. So is that illegal?
You can catch them in the United States. In Costa Rica, their rules are totally different. Everything is too many.
So you can't spear them in the United
You
States?
can't spear them.
Okay.
I must have not seen the right property. I
I don't know if you catch that in the United
there was
States.
another.
I don't know if they have those in the United States.
Well, they have a black and blue marlin in
Oh, it's under.
off of Chuck Cay in the Atlantic side.
Okay.
Oh, well, that's
Not in the Gulf side. That's a beautiful fish.
This was some
And
smaller
that is
property.
the Goliath?
No, that's a big black marlin. Look at the size of that thing.
50 feet.
And he fishes in Costa Rica, huh?
No, he's out of Miami, but people fly him all over. And they, he was,
Yeah, thank you.
That's what my son wants to do too. That's why he publicizes this.
yeah, he's got a, you can
It's
follow
like
him
a
on.
National Geographic type
I
picture. That's a
know.
gorgeous picture.
That's beautiful.
That's what I thought when I.
Look at the water
I've never
too, man.
seen a fish
That's
like
got to
that.
be 200-foot visibility. Look how clear the water is.
Yeah, and his colorings, and it kind of matches his colorings, which I thought was interesting. Of whatever suit he has on.
Had asked a whole bunch of people.
There's three guys holding it up. I mean, if you can see how
to
big.
get it upright.
You can see this.
I like to spear fish, but not typically fish that are larger than me. I like to be the predator. I would feel like I was being preyed
Yeah,
on
like
by that fish.
cobia. My son-in-law get cobia all the time.
I'm just like, I'm fishing.
That is really cool.
And he's
I envy
doing it
that.
without
I
a
envy
tank.
that.
He is free
Oh,
diving.
they're free diving?
He free dives. Yeah.
I'm not aware they cut that marlin up by the
Here's a picture of my son.
Oh, that is a nice.
That's your permanent.
I want to put with his oldest fish.
I gotta say this to favorites so that I don't have to hunt for it. This one, the red of the blood, is just really. There you see the spear, and that may have been to help bring him back up because he started going down. He had to fight.
Thank you.
But the blood is so vivid. I mean, the red's a beautiful.
I wonder if they were using those the bully darts to blow up for a fish that big.
No, but they weren't hunting this fish. They were hunting. I believe they were chasing bonita.
They just came into
And
them.
he came into. He may have been hunting the bonita too. How you doing, Karen?
Good, how are you?
Good.
This is my son with some, I don't even know what that is. Giant fish they got.
Yeah, that's nice. Trey.
Yes.
Let me move in here just for a minute to show
Someone
him
else
how
is gonna do this, right?
to- Well, it's all.
So
right from
we've
the
got
chair.
a 40-foot Intrepid. That's just our new. It's my third house.
Yeah.
It's the house in Colorado that I can't afford now. And my husband took my youngest son Zach and 7 of his fraternity brothers to the Keys off me. And they ended up not making it one day. They spent the night in the Everglades near Chokoloskee. It's really good. I ended up buying them a blow-up tent, so 2 of them could sleep on the deck in the tent. And 2 of them were in Enos, suspended under our roof, and one on a pull-out, you know, where the seating area is, and then the other ones were downstairs. But they went fishing and the Keys.
Okay.
Oh, my husband didn't see them until.
I got
What
you.
time? My husband said he went to bed at 10 and they went to bed at 4. So he didn't see him much during the day.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, he took them fishing in the afternoons when they were awake. And they caught a lemon shark. Great big one, 7 foot.
Glad I wasn't caught on the bridge.
They let it go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we ended up,
Boys wanted to bring it on the boat.
I guess the
My husband's
truck
like,
was,
absolutely not.
outside the
I
river.
went in the water.
I have a book. that I
It stays on, so you can.
do not take a live shark into a boat. That is a big mistake.
Oh,
to take
yeah.
a live shark into a boat.
If you want to know why, just go to videos on YouTube and put in that live shark on a boat.
Yeah, right,
You'll
right.
see people's hands in them. They'll come and get your ankles and your legs.
I didn't get to say goodbye to you because I thought you were going to have wine with us. I was 40 minutes late to my dinner. You know, I got lost just going to my son. too far off. I know it. I went right, and I went too far left.
Good. How you been? Good.
Doing well, sir. Thank
So
you.
I didn't get sick 5 years.
Just as a reminder at the end of the meeting,
Oh, yeah,
Commissioner Vanette has spent some time as to host us.
but here's the very sad thing.
Spring, fantastic. Looking forward. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
He's like, oh,
Results before we
Right.
delve into it too much.
okay. So I show up for some
That's
half
not
an
to
hour
put the
late.
weeds on things
There
until
was
you have the
a
answers. I've
Yes.
learned in life.
Yes,
In my
that's a
seat,
good lesson.
it's in a private room.
Who are we
There's a
waiting
bottle,
for? Do we have any?
gift,
Well, the most
bag
important
with wine
person
in
at this
it, and
point
a
is
card
Melanie.
and a visor. Turns out everyone's got a
give her a-
visor. And I'm looking at it.
She
thinking,
called to
She is
say
on
she
her
was.
way.
third
So I
wine
think
tasting at Sacred
she'll
Pepper.
be arriving.
So I'm trying to figure out, are we all getting a gift?
Probably
of
was on the same traffic I was in.
And then I look,
Yes.
and my husband goes, "Happy anniversary." I totally forgot. I totally forgot it was the anniversary. And I even looking at the wine and the card and everything, I still didn't figure out that it was my anniversary. And Trey had told everybody to watch.
I know.
Past the
They were all
accident.
saying she is not going to realize when she sees that what's going on. Even with the gifts in there.
Yeah, those express lanes will help too.
Isn't that
So
all?
Whit Glenn is doing the. Whit Glenn is doing
Doing
the.
the CCC, yes.
We've served up other
Yeah,
boards
yeah.
together.
We go way back. This was back in our
Hey,
Yes.
to double check
Get
Yes, here, if you have
meeting,
any.
And Melanie will be. The three. They're going to make a recommendation.
I missed the board meeting.
I'm not sure. I think
Never have missed a
the
board.
recommendation
Yeah, I just like
might
to
be
double check.
three. Well, I think the recommendation might be three with negotiating with the first choice. Second choice. I think they have them in order, and then like if it doesn't work out, they would go to the next one.
And I was sharing the board.
Okay, well, all right.
I was thinking if we could at least
Many different ways.
Yeah, we had something in there that we're removing. We've got to have some more talks with that
And if you can, get a hold of
on
the
the consent agenda
morning,
on this.
email me, because we're gonna be.
Resolution.
The resolution on this other JPA, this, so we're taking that off. We're taking talk to them.
Well, I'm telling you, I just had to make
They're
sure.
more questioning,
Well, this is the problem. Okay.
their
We
opinion.
don't even know where this is. This was probably asked 4 or 5 years ago by someone else in category. And we're not sure that we need a bragging rights study, so we're trying to see, can this money be used for something else? Plus it requires a
So this was originally
It
scheduled.
requires a local.
Yeah, I think you're probably gonna get the same answer from them, but I think it'd be better to do that than to have them go that route and find a different answer.
They
Finally.
really need someone from
Right.
That's why they call me.
So we're gonna talk to them about, okay, do we need a parking rights study? Where are we gonna get another agency like the
They asked us to go and he said it's not
work on
coming.
it? Or do we wanna do something else like a BRT study?
Have you not gone on?
So
have you
we're,
gone on?
we just need to talk us through, we said, kind of keep it.
On one hand, we don't have money. On the other hand, we do. Maybe we should spend it elsewhere, right? It's kind of
Right,
close to
exactly.
that.
Well, I don't wanna do something stupid, or, you know,
And I'm happy to share one with you. Like we're at the Intercontinental and the room is $200.
you know, just,
And you don't have any expenses after that.
this is the way I've always run agencies that I
The
work.
mayor's coming back.
I don't
Thursday,
try to think
So
of
you can come back
how
Thursday
much
with the mayor.
That's a good
You know,
first principle.
and I like turning back money, like when we were with the county.
I'm good. Adam, how you doing?
You can go Tuesday to Thursday.
Good morning.
You know, my predecessor now, he would say,
I'm
oh,
going
let's
in
get
Monday
you
because
some
I'm
viewers.
coming in for myself.
I guess probably some of the Hillsborough County folks are stuck with the bridge.
We're just waiting for.
You know my phone.
Yeah, I think
talked
as
to
soon as
Rick
you
on the way down. He called me and told me about it.
yeah,
I know, I was giving Melanie a
and
little
she
time.
was
She's
gonna
coming
go
on the
on the
bridge.
Gambie, but then it was.
But I think I'm gonna go ahead and call and get going.
Put that agenda item and come back to it.
I will, yeah. Well, I think she'll probably hopefully be here. So I think Melanie can join in.
Yes.
You know, he's been a big walker.
Wait, what do you
He's
see?
been the biggest walker fans now. Yeah. So I'm like,
Okay. You're not really seeing it, you're just adding something.
Yeah, I talked to Rick right after, all the shakeup, and he was like, I don't know.
Okay.
Would everyone take their seats, please?
yeah, yeah.
Going to call the TBARTA board meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Betsy, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Present.
Melanie Griffin, Cliff Manuel,
Present.
Michael Miller,
Present.
Commissioner Wayne Dukes. Commissioner Dukes has his regrets. He will not be able to join us today. Commissioner Pat Kemp, Commissioner Betsy Benak,
Here.
Commissioner Kathleen Starkey,
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal,
Present.
Mayor Rick Kreisman. Mayor Kreisman sends his regrets. He will not be able to join us today. Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Mayor Buckhorn sends his regrets. He will not be able to join us today. Kathleen Shanahan. Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Secretary David Gwynn.
Here.
Secretary L.K. Mandan. Secretary Mandan sends his regrets. He will not be able to join us today. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, and as I understand it, Melanie is on the way. She was caught in traffic with a terrible fire on the bridge, so we will go on, and when it's time for her to give her report, we can come back to that if we have to go ahead of it, jump ahead of it. Sue, would you also give the public service announcement regarding public comment?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Do we have any public comment cards? And anyone wishing to make a comment, please do it now if you have not, and give it to staff. Okay, hearing no public comment, I call public comment closed. Next order of business is the consent agenda items. Item number 3 has been taken off that for further consideration, so it's really just approval of the minutes and the authorization of the execution of a joint participation agreement, which we've discussed before.
Move approval. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll next turn to committee reports. Whit Blanton is up first on the CCC report.
Continuing effort involving TBARTA on the MPO regional coordination structure research, which is looking at best practices, and the latest development in that for our MPOs is we've shortlisted a tentative list of case studies for your MPOs to look at for potential merger and consolidation discussion, and they are across the country. They vary in size, they vary in scale, they vary in functionality, but they have some common frames of reference. For instance, we're looking at NPOs that have made significant strides in transit investment. And that list will be finalized in the next few weeks, and then we'll be doing some outreach with those NPO partners. We're also continuing to coordinate with TBARTA and HART and other agencies on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. We recently distributed the Memorandum of Understanding that you all drafted, and I know each of our boards is developing some suggested edits to bring back to TBARTA for consideration. I know our board acted on that. We shared our comments with the other NPOs, so I think you'll see the NPOs coming back with some consistent language on that. In addition, we are working toward the 2019 Regional Multimodal Priority List. We develop that every year, and it is a statement of needs for near-term funding for the Florida Department of Transportation. And we expect to have that list developed over the summer. And that will inform recommendations for each of the NPOs. And then the Regional Transit Feasibility, or the Transportation Regional Incentive Program, or TRIP, we are also developing a party list for that. And you may recall that TRIP funding requires a 50-50 local match. So we're identifying those projects that can be eligible for that program as well. Upcoming, in July meeting of the CCC board, we will be having a joint meeting with the Central Florida NPO Alliance. That meeting is going to be July 13th at Hillsborough Community College in Plant City. We'll start at 10 a.m. with a meeting of the Chairs Coordinating Committee, where we will, thank you very much, we'll be talking about regional multi-use trails, the TRIP priority list, and taking action on those two items. And then we're working on some different presentations. At 11 a.m., we'll have a joint meeting, as I mentioned, with the Central Florida NPO Alliance, and the preliminary discussion items include a joint presentation with the Tampa Bay Partnership and the Orlando Economic Partnership. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to try and answer those.
Thank you. Whit, any questions for Whit? If you'd heard, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. All right, next, the chair recognizes Jeffrey Seward on HART presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. Jeff Seward, Interim Chief Executive Officer of HART and the Chairman of the Transit Management Committee. At our last Transit Management Committee, we had the opportunity to talk about the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. Specifically heard from the Tampa Bay Partnership on their perspective and discussed the Memorandum of Understanding that's going before the various agencies in the region with TBARTA concerning the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. That MOU will be going to the HART Board on April the 2nd for HART Board consideration. We also received an overview and presentation on the Regional Interjurisdictional Fare Card Program, which is better known as Flamingo. I've talked to you about that over the last couple of years. We will be presenting that program to you in the next couple of months. We're going live in Florida's first regional fare program on Labor Day weekend. Also at the TMC, we held our annual elections for chairman, and I've been reappointed. It'll be my third year going into the Transit Management Committee chairmanship. I appreciate the opportunity, and particularly over the next year or so, we really have to have much stronger conversations with the regional transit agencies on not just the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, but other opportunities of technology, our different rideshare programs. Many of us are looking at doing the same types of programs. It'll be very beneficial for us to start working together and going out collectively for many, many of these innovative programs for better funding opportunities and better stewardship of those funding dollars as they come in. So I thank you for the continued ability to chair that committee and look at good things coming up in the future again with that committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff? None being heard, thanks. We were waiting on a report from Melanie, but I think she's caught up in traffic due to the horrible fire on the bridge. And
Yeah.
was that pretty bad? Folks
Terrible
coming over
traffic
from
on both Andy and Howard.
Yeah.
It's still red and blocked.
So that being said, we're going to defer her presentation because it's very important to this meeting. And instead, we're going to do something that we're going to do later in the program, which is show a brief informational video and a PowerPoint it was produced by PSTA and very informative on BRT technology and subsequent technologies down the road. And this is, as I understand it, has received widespread applause from folks in the community that have already seen it.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Brad Miller. Welcome to PSTA. I'm the CEO of PSTA. And I would just like to give a really quick presentation with some pretty neat videos included in it to talk about what PSTA is doing that we think are sort of incremental baby steps toward the ultimate idea of a regional transit feasibility plan for the future of our region, the express service that connects all of our counties. Right now, there is limited service, but we do have express services that connect Pinellas and Hillsborough. We've got one service on the Gandy Bridge that called the 100X, and we have one service on the Howard Franklin Bridge. They are relatively limited, but they carry about 80,000 trips a year in total, back and forth. Actually, it's almost 50-50 going to Hillsborough and going back to Pinellas on those services. The Howard Franklin Bridge service is about every hour in the peak period with a midday trips, and then the Gandy service is better. It's about every half hour in the peak periods. Neither of the services operate on the weekends, however. But we have some plans that I'm very excited to present to you to start improving these. This coming in June, thanks entirely to our great partner in the Florida Department of Transportation, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to extend the Gandy Bridge service that goes to downtown Tampa down I-275 to downtown St. Petersburg. That's funded by urban corridor funds that the DOT is providing us. That'll provide the first service that we've had from downtown St. Pete to downtown Tampa. In addition, in June, we will add a stop on the existing Howard Franklin Bridge service that goes to the Tampa International Airport. And we're very, very excited about that, for the first time ever to have Pinellas to the airport service. And at the TMA meeting a couple weeks ago, the executive of the airport, Joe Lopano, said, well, he's pleased that finally he gets some transit service from Pinellas County instead of only having to announce like trips to Zurich and other places, that there can be some service. We've been getting a lot of calls on this and interest. It's not what we believe the citizens of our community deserve as far as service to the airport. We think it'll largely start out as you can plan your trip, you can park for free in a lot on Ulmerton Road and schedule your flight. Your flight, probably it'll be hard to guarantee because of the limitations on the service that you can take the bus back, but you could take an Uber back and still save money. And that's how we're going to market it to start. Of course, as you know, we have this plan, the regional transit plan concept, and so we believe these steps are incremental steps toward working to that. That brings us to the future plans. We hope to increase the service and provide faster service on both those routes. And we are very pleased to partner with the Florida Department of Transportation. FDOT has selected Pinellas County as a pilot for their bus on shoulders concept, which, as you know, is part of the Regional Transit Feasibility Program. And we are working with them closely to pilot that first on the shoulders of I-275. So I'm going to show you this little video.
The Florida Department of Transportation initiated a study to develop statewide guidance and criteria for bus-on-shoulder operations in Florida. The bus-on-shoulder concept has been utilized by several transit agencies around the country. It is a cost-effective measure to improve transit travel time reliability and increase ridership. When speeds drop below 35 miles per hour in the general purpose lanes, the bus may merge onto an 11-foot to 12-foot wide shoulder bypassing traffic. Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, or PSTA, is collaborating with FDOT on a pilot project along a 5-mile segment of Interstate 275 in Pinellas County. Pinellas County is one of the most densely populated counties in the state with 2 major cities, St. Petersburg and Clearwater. These cities are major centers for jobs and commerce and have experienced consistent growth over the years. With growth, there comes a need for an efficient transportation system and alternative modes of transportation. The proposed Bus on Shoulder project is consistent with the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. Currently, the I-275 corridor is operating at a level of service F during morning and evening peak periods, which indicates the corridor is heavily congested. These conditions are expected to get worse over the next 20 years if nothing changes. In an effort to maintain schedule reliability, PSTA plans to implement Bus on Shoulder. With few infrastructure improvements, the bus can travel on the shoulder and bypass congestion. PSTA buses will operate on an 11.5-foot shoulder to ensure drivers have adequate space to operate comfortably and safely. A profiled thermoplastic marking strip will be added to the outside edge of travel along the corridor as a safety guide for vehicles. The Bus on Shoulder corridor will have signs showing drivers the beginning and end of the Bus on Shoulder segment. Signs throughout the corridor will alert drivers to watch for buses on shoulder and warn drivers that only authorized buses are allowed on the shoulder. PSTA will provide advanced training for the bus drivers operating on the shoulder. The Bus on Shoulder route is an extension of Route 100X to downtown St. Petersburg. While the current 100X service operates as a commuter route during peak hours, PSTA's vision is to eventually operate this route every 30 minutes from downtown St. Petersburg to downtown Tampa during the hours of 5 a.m. and 12 a.m. Monday through Friday. In the northbound direction, the Bus on Shoulder route will begin at the I-275, I-375 interchange. Using the 5th Avenue ramp, the bus will merge on to I-275 North. If the Bus on Shoulder conditions have been met, the bus will proceed onto the shoulder. At interchanges along the corridor, the bus will yield to oncoming traffic, merging back into traffic if necessary. There is the potential to add ramp meters at busy interchanges to allow a gap for the bus to stay on shoulder. The bus will continue on I-275 North to the 22nd Avenue exit, where the bus will make an interim stop at the 22nd Avenue Park and Ride lot. After pickup, the bus will merge back onto I-275, continuing to the Gandy Boulevard ramp where it will exit the interstate. At this location, the bus route will continue onto the Gandy Bridge, providing a direct connection to downtown Tampa for commuters. In the southbound direction, the bus will merge onto I-275 South at the Gandy Boulevard ramp and continue to the 22nd Avenue Park and Ride lot. The bus will then re-enter I-275 South and proceed to the 5th Avenue exit, utilizing the outside shoulder as permitted. The multi-agency partnership between the Florida Department of Transportation, PSTA, Federal Highway Administration, and state and local law enforcement provides the foundation for a successful pilot project. The Bus on Shoulder project is scheduled to start in 2019. Stay tuned for more information. If you have any questions in the meantime, contact Elba Lopez or Gabrielle Matthews with the Florida Department of Transportation.
Pretty exciting. There are some things that need to be done to make that happen, make that a reality. One of the things that the video discussed was hardening the shoulders and doing some other actual work. I personally got to experience that yesterday when we had a massive accident in Pinellas County and it was completely backed up and they sent the traffic onto the shoulder, and I had seen this video before and I didn't know what hardening the shoulder was, but the shoulders right now out there are not hard. When you go on the grass and the shoulder, they need some work to carry a bus, I know that. As you can see, this is part of what is being proposed for this regional premium transit plan. Obviously, there needs to be some improvements to the frequency and span to make this reality, and we do want to make this ultimately as we've discussed, and I think you'll hear later today, a gold standard, a high-quality transit experience for our customers. And so the next video I'm going to show you is a video that Commissioner Long showed me about new kinds of vehicles and new kinds of technology that are emerging all the time as we know it. When we were just in Washington, D.C. earlier this week, that's what the Federal Transit Administration talked about, having your projects be nimble enough to be able to change to the new technologies that seem to be coming out every single day. There is this program down in Miami, you might have read about it, that they are planning on doing a whole bunch of corridors, and they have proposed this new kind of vehicle that I know that the mayor of Miami and others just recently went to China to take a look at. Let me see if I can get it here.
High-quality rapid transit without tracks. It's fast, reliable, and comfortable. It's what communities around the world are opting for because it's innovative and cost-effective. Rapid Transit Service, or RTS, has all the benefits of rail or light rail, but it costs less and takes less time to implement. The vehicles are rubber-tire trackless trains, and one of the greatest benefits of RTS is that it runs on paved, dedicated roadways. First implemented in Curitiba, Brazil in the 1970s, now more than 100 cities all over the world are using RTS. RTS features dedicated travel lanes, limited stops, prepaid fare collection, and level boarding so passengers can quickly board. RTS will also feature closed, climate-controlled, well-lit, and fully accessible stations equipped with next vehicle signs. And with new smart signals, RTS vehicles won't wait at red lights, making service reliable. Along the South Miami-Dade Transitway, enhanced stations will be located at the center of the corridor, positioned along key commercial and business areas. RTS vehicles will travel along the center lanes, with one lane in each direction. RTS is Miami-Dade County's down payment for the future.
So that's a pretty neat new technology that basically uses those painted lanes that you saw in the video and uses that sort of as the guideway that tracks the vehicle. Ultimately, I don't think the current model that is up and running is totally autonomous, but it has the potential to be autonomous because it's following essentially that guideway. So it's a pretty neat technology that we want to explore further. Maybe perhaps even on the Central Avenue BRT as a start for that, and then that ultimately maybe becomes one of the technologies we look at for the regional plan as well. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for that very informative presentation. And I had read myself in the Miami Herald about this delegation from Miami going to both China and Japan to view this technology, and it seems like something we obviously consider as the next generation as we move along in our process here with our catalytic project. And as I understand it, eventually these vehicles can be used by strictly GPS-guided technology and potentially change routes, but stick along a corridor, so there also can be transit-oriented development along that key corridor as well.
Right.
So, I mean, it seems like it could have a win-win-win all around to address some of the issues that have concerned us here with mixed, ideas of what we have to do and what we don't need to do. So I think it's something to definitely explore, and perhaps TBARTA and others from the community can take a similar trip to China or whatever to view these kinds of technologies. I, for one, would love to go. So, other questions for Red? Commissioner Long.
No, Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen, I'm sorry.
I don't know if they're red. I just wanted to know, when is Miami-Dade's timeframe in terms of launching that? Do you have any idea what their implementation timeframe is?
I don't know much about exactly what their plan is. I did talk to some people who told me that they have a multi-corridor proposal, and they're sort of in the similar debate that we're in, whether or not there's some folks in their community that really want rail, and there's some that want a more nimble kind of technology. So the mayor took this trip and to highlight this technology that, as the narration discussed, is very rail-like, but does provide a little bit more flexibility. I think they're proposing to start this or pilot this on an existing dedicated right-of-way that they operate bus rapid transit on now in the next year, is what the mayor hopes, and then ultimately expand that to the whole Miami-Dade. I don't know the timing on the full expansion.
Other questions? I think Commissioner Long was next.
Well, I'll go last.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just gonna follow up to Kathleen's comment. So they already have those lanes in place down the highway in the southern part of the county. So they have an easy, I think, transformation to change it from a traditional bus. They have a BRT lane.
Yeah.
From traditional buses to this kind of more interesting technology and I think it's gonna be that kind of technology that makes it successful, because there's that stigma, sorry, getting on a bus.
It's okay.
Commissioner Kemp, were you wishing to?
Sure. I thought all of the presentations were interesting. I'm glad to see that there will finally be some express bus service that I don't know whether it was at this body or the TMA that I specifically asked that we have something like that from St. Petersburg, because I guess the service you have now that goes to the airport, I looked online and it was a 3-hour and 40-minute route from downtown St. Petersburg up through North Pinellas into the airport currently. So I'm really glad to see these streamlined routes, which is, to me, exactly what we should be doing and what we're talking about and is needed. Secondly, just in terms of this technology and all the technologies we're looking at, I mean, I think the bottom line is right-of-way. You have to have right-of-way. And when you don't have right-of-way, it's all about having the most premium thing is a dedicated corridor, which is the reason we all got stopped today. Because there's no such thing as a dedicated corridor. Well, if we were on transit, you know, if we had had a dedicated corridor, we might have been able to make it in. But I'd also like to, just in response to the, and I can appreciate the transit-oriented development, but one of the key things about transit-oriented development, just to be clear, is really the difference between being on an elevated expressway highway and being at grade in terms of making that happen. And that's one of the key elements, and even when the Times featured the articles on the BRT, those were all 9-mile lines compared to this, but they were all also at grade separated, at grade, street level BRTs that they gave examples of. Finally, I'm glad to see the bus shouldering explained. I know, again, I don't know if it was this meeting or the TMA that, you know, we heard that somehow the buses were going to go at 45 miles an hour. And I think it's important for people to understand the limitations and the opportunities involved in the bus shouldering, that when you harden it, and I didn't know it could be hardened within the year, but that's great, by 2019, but that the buses would only, as I understand it, go on the shoulders when traffic was under 35 miles an hour, correct?
That's correct. That is the proposed program for the pilot, for this technology pilot, or this pilot that's proposed for the next year or two in Pinellas County. For the future, I think based on what the pilot results show, those parameters on miles per hour and whatnot can be changed. There are different parameters in different parts of the country for how the bus on shoulder idea works. So what you saw in the video was really strictly for a pilot of this that then changes, no doubt, changes in what we ultimately do long-term come out.
Because I had read about this in Minneapolis and what they do, and they're the most advanced in this bus shouldering in the nation. They have apparently 300 miles of bus shouldering in that area as compared to 100 miles in the whole rest of the country together. And as I had explained before, because I thought there seemed to be misconceptions and the information I was getting and I wanted to understand, was that the bus shouldering in Minneapolis, which is really the most sophisticated and the highest protocols for safety and everything else, is that they would put a bus onto the shoulder when the traffic was under 35 miles an hour for the period that it was under for 35 miles an hour and then move back into general traffic again. Also, the bus is limited to 15 miles an hour above whatever the traffic is going for, as you can imagine, safety reasons.
Right.
So that if the traffic is stopped, for instance, the bus could go 15 miles an hour. If the traffic is going 10 miles an hour, the bus could go 25 miles an hour, but then would pull into the general traffic. So I just think it's important for us to look, because it's not exactly comparable. There's good functions of it, but it's not a dedicated corridor. And, you know, it has limitations and opportunities. But I think the presentation and the possibilities are, it's great to see and good information.
Thank you for those comments, and I think we were looking for the broader picture down the road perhaps too, and of course, we are looking as we go through this process. This plan is a living, evolving plan. It is not, nothing is written in stone as of yet, and that's the purposes of these public hearings, to have suggestions and ideas about, you know, going further towards dedicated lanes as opposed to shared managed lanes and things like that that make perfect sense to all of us, I think. So that said, I think I will recognize Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to follow up to Brad's presentation by saying that in Pinellas County, it's relatively easy for us to implement this kind of new technology because the county started a year and a half or two ago, Commissioner Seal can correct me if I get the timing wrong, on an ATM, automated traffic management system. And slowly but surely, we have been automating our traffic intersections so that as long as you're going the right miles per hour, you can just go right through and hit no red lights. And so that's really part of the premise to preparing for the future. And Mr. Chair, if there's time at the end, I think it would be very informative for our board to hear an overview from Mr. Miller about our recent trip to DC and the new infrastructure bill that just passed out of the House because it's very pertinent to our transportation funding.
I think that would be appropriate under new business.
Thank you.
Other questions for Brad? Cliff?
How is law enforcement currently working with y'all on the pilot program as far as highway patrol pulling over people into the, because, you know, they're typically in that lane, and then we're supposed to clear the other lane for them, so actually, you know, you're not supposed to go by them as they're pulled over either. Is there hardening of the shoulders? Are there any considerations for safe places for them to pull people into that wouldn't be on the shoulder, so we still had the two lanes clear going by them?
Well, I think the best person to answer that question would be folks that are with the Florida DOT and on their design team for the pilot, but they are looking at other examples like in Minneapolis and other places where they do have special, even wider areas for disabled vehicles, and as you saw in the video, the signage, there will be signage, of course, limiting it only for buses, but if you do have an accident, suggesting you pull all the way over to the grass in some areas, or a special dedicated area to keep the shoulder clear for the buses. There's also the discussion that at the exit ramps, there can be technology where it'll be basically ramp metering, where it'll pause the exiting cars or entering cars so that the bus can keep going straight through the exit ramp on that shoulder. So all those things are being considered now. It is going to take a lot of coordination with the law enforcement and the motorists to implement this technology. That's why FDOT appropriately wants to do a pilot.
I think a pilot program is definitely the right way to start, but they also should be involved in the discussion for the hardening process, because you can eliminate some issues in your pilot program if it's thought about or anticipated ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that'd be one that would be of concern to me in that program. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Cliff. Any other, Commissioner Kent?
I'd just like to respond to what I've read information about that, and that is one of the issues that comes with the bus hardening of the shoulders, because accidents, that's why I say the buses are at 15 miles per hour, because you don't know if someone might suddenly pull over, if there's an obstruction in the shoulder. It's one of the issues that they have with the hardening shoulders and why it isn't, you know, a dedicated corridor. But I also saw significant complaints at times that sometimes drivers were out of control or did dangerous things, and that that if the police pulled somebody over, it stopped the bus system from running. The bus system had to get back in again, and that there was some hesitation. Some people felt hesitation on the part of the roads to be patrolled quite as well as they could be, because they didn't want to interfere with the bus travel.
So where the bus lanes were, less tickets. Thank you.
All right, any others? Thank you so much, Brad, for those comments, and we will hear from you again in new business. As they say in the courts, don't leave the area here, you'll be called back. Thanks so much. And Melanie, welcome. Glad you made it through that traffic, and hope everything is all right on the bridge.
I learned a lot about transit this morning.
Like their
That said, we're anxious to hear your policy committee report. We understand you have some things to recommend to us today.
Absolutely. So we met on Wednesday, and I want to thank the committee. So we have 6 members. We had all of them in attendance, including 4 in person, which was a challenge, but we made it happen to have a formal recommendation to Before I get there, very briefly, one of the things that we first considered that I think is germane to this topic is the technical and cost analysis of the score sheet that was included in the materials circulated to the board. There was a maximum of 1,000 points, a maximum of 700 for technical scoring, and a maximum of 300 for cost scoring. And I bring this up because it'll come into the recommendations made, is that although that was the analysis that was set forth in the PSTA RFP, it quote unquote hasn't been used necessarily by one of our sister agencies, meaning that PSTA, when it sent out its RFP, it received 7 responses and approved all 7 responses. So we certainly have all of the technical and cost scoring, but cost scoring was not used to differentiate between one of the 7. They were all approved. And part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because the cost analysis, the way that it's set forth in the PSTA RFP, can have such a skew that it makes it nearly impossible for a high-cost proposal with a good technical or a very high technical score to ever be selected. It would almost automatically always give the bid absolutely to the lowest score proposal and completely disregard technical. And so PSTA, again, since they have not yet, in a good way, had to make a choice about those 7 entities, hasn't used it, and the RFP doesn't contemplate that they would use that cost scoring in its selection of one of the 7. Similarly, Hart, when it selected Krautheimer, when it thought that it might make an outside selection for a new executive director earlier this year, it somewhat disregarded the cost analysis and decided by itself that it would put the most weight on technical scoring to look at one of the higher cost proposals and ultimately make that selection. So with that, we did look at the like I said, the breakdown, and thought that it was a good measure in terms of technical scoring. We certainly wanted to take cost considerations into consideration, but maybe not use the analysis set forth in the PSTA RFP. And so with that, we have 3 recommendations. I know you tasked us with 2, but we're overachievers. So we have 3 recommendations for you. And that, again, is going to tie back into this technical and cost analysis. And the 3 recommendations in order in the way they were voted on by the 6 members are Krautheimer and Associates, KL2 Connects, and Narlock. And what I can tell you is that those also go in, so that was the number 1, 2, and 3 in order selections of the committee. That is actually the number 1, 2, and 3 order of their technical scoring. So highest technical score to, next highest technical score to third highest technical score. And it also happens to be the reverse order of cost pricing. So Krautheimer being the most expensive proposal, KL2 Connects being the next highest, and then Narlock being actually considerably lower than those 2. And so the part of the reason that we wanted to bring 3 entities to you was that while Krautheimer and KL2 Connect certainly had the most superior technical scores, Narlock also had a good technical score, and being that it was getting traction from some of the policy committee members and that there was this price differential, we wanted to give the board a choice.
Okay, thank you for that, and thanks for all the hard work. I'm sure board members are going to have some questions on this before we kind of get into the discussion on it. Karen.
Thank you. I tried to pull up the file, and I couldn't completely do that. So could you tell us what the cost differential is?
Yes. I was going to say, and actually, and Cameron, do you have it right in front of you? I apologize. In my hurriedness of leaving the office, my memory is, I think it's 6645-ish, and yeah, like 1923. But again, I want to give you exact numbers. Yeah, that would be great.
Got it?
Yes. Okay. For Krauthammer, the executive level search is 60,000. For, pardon me, KL2 Connects, it is 47,000. And for Narlock, 19,000.
My guesses were pretty good.
Betsy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wondered, the experience with these different firms. Who can speak to the experience that anyone has had with any of these different firms?
And with that, I will defer to Commissioners Starkey and Long, because that is why, given this considerable price differential, I'm going to say give them one tidbit, and then I'm going to defer to them, is that with Narlock and Associates, approximately 5%, while they certainly have worked on transportation and transit executive searches and done very well in those searches, 5% or less approximately of Narlock's business does deal with the transportation transit world. The primary portion of their business deals more with other types of county and government searches like civil service boards. Part of the reason that Krautheimer and KL2 Connects received higher technical scoring was their vast transit and transportation executive searches and the success therein in both small and large metropolitan areas, and the personal experience that they have had successfully placing candidates not only across the country, but particularly with Krautheimer in the Tampa Bay area. And with that, I will let Commissioners Starkey and Long add on their comments, having personally worked with all 3 entities and having knowledge of all 3 entities.
Commissioner Long.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy, it's very brief, I'm happy to let the board know of the reasoning behind my decision to make Krautheimer the number 1 choice in my review of all of these. And I did make a statement at the policy committee that even though these fees are listed, that whoever ends up, I'm assuming it might be the chair, I don't know, you usually, these firms are very amenable to negotiating the cost and working with us when they're working with a government entity. I chose them because they are so highly established, well-connected, and known as an industry leader nationwide. They have an expert team with 145 years of recruiting experience between them all. They keep a huge focus on commitment and have many multiple assignments distributed among their team and a very long list of satisfied clients. They have a very detailed approach with diverse placements. They have an extremely good history of meeting expectations, and most importantly to me, they have a 75-day to 90-day timeline with frequent updates and reports. And that was my number one reason for choosing them. Commissioner Stark, maybe.
Well, also, KL2 was founded actually by folks in the transit business. And did they get the same, did the other board members get the same information we did or no?
Yes, they received it.
Okay.
Now, granted, they've had a lot less time, so
Yeah,
they just
sure.
got it yesterday, but yes, they received the same
Well,
information.
you can see the list of transit projects that KL2 has worked on, and Kraut-Talmer also has an extensive list. And now, I've never worked with either one of those, so I just wanted to correct your statement. But I have worked with Narlock, and Renee was a very easy person to work with, and we used her actually for a county administrator search. So I put Narlock as third because there just wasn't as much transit background as the others, but she is a very effective company, so.
And one caveat I want to make on the record based on our advice from council, that we believe due to this desire to piggyback, that because TBARTA does not require an RFP process for bids that are under $35,000, if we wanted to try to further negotiate the Narlock contract below $19,000, with it being lower on the totem pole, I don't even know if that's possible, but we think we could do it because we're not quote unquote taking advantage of the synergy of an RFP. We wouldn't have had to have done an RFP to enter into a contract with them anyway. There is a concern regarding, although we would usually be able to negotiate with Krautheimer and KL2 Connects regarding their pricing if we had done an RFP, because we didn't and we're enjoying the synergies of another sister agency's RFP, we don't think we could negotiate anything over 35 because we need to accept their contract prices under the RFP that we're enjoying the benefits of.
Other comments? Cliff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is unusual for me to have these things mixed together. In my professional solicitation for this type of work, it's 100% qualifications, and money cannot be considered in those discussions. When I looked at these, I looked at it sort of 90-10. You know, I was using the money that was there as sort of a maybe if someone was really close from a qualification standpoint, would that sway me one way or the other in my thought process? But it seems to me, and maybe Cameron can weigh in on this, that we should decide if we're going to select based on qualifications, or if money's included, I think it has to be under 35. So I mean, I'm not used to them being blended, and if you could provide me some direction on that, I think I'll be able to make a decision. Thank you.
Cameron?
Yes, under public procurement law, the RFP process is actually a nice sort of blend process between, say, cost and qualifications. Under standard invitations to bid, which local governments use all the time, you have to go with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. But with an RFP, you're allowed to consider qualifications, you're allowed to consider price as a factor, but price isn't the deciding factor. It's sort of, and basically the way this RFP process was unusual to review, because I can't remember seeing one before. You had 7 proposals come in and all 7 get the contract. Usually when you'd be piggybacking, imagine this, that PSTA went through this process and they just selected one, you really wouldn't have a choice at that point. You're piggybacking onto an existing contract, which is the one that they entered into after they finished the RFP process. This one, you actually have the ability to make the same sort of judgment that PSTA made, because they awarded all 7. You can decide which 7 you want to piggyback onto. In this instance, the reason PSTA did use price as a factor, and also, our policy committee, when reviewing it, used price as a factor, although they de-emphasized it to a degree because qualification mattered more. So in the end, I think the board can really take a decision as to what's most important to you. If you can consider a blend of these two factors, and as policy committee did when it came up with its final decision. So in the end, I don't think you're locked into saying it has to be qualifications or cost. You can take a decision as to how you want to blend those two to come up with the decision that you want.
Agreed. Add on, the example I would give would be Hart in terms of, having the excerpt from their December 2017 board meeting is that, and I'm not saying that TBARTA wants to do the same thing, it's up to us and how we want to control this today, but certainly Hart considered when it selected Krautheimer for its search, when it thought it was going to do one, that it quote unquote ignored that cost feature, or certainly to the extent it didn't ignore it, downplayed it to give emphasis to the technical scoring and to select the technical superior entity.
Then after that decision's made, is it true that the fee cannot be negotiated if it's over 35? Does that even come into the discussion?
I wanted to get clarification from council. I understand as a matter of law, it cannot exceed.
And this is, and I'll admit, in a review, there's not anything that's 100% clear cut on this. So basically what you're looking at is existing case law, and you're sort of coming up with what it is, what the purpose of the process is. And just to use the examples we have here, and this is in state procurement law for state agencies, and it's also in your accounting manual, for consultant contracts between 20 and 35,000, the process is it's ideally to see 2 or more written proposals or bids, but you don't have to go through a formal RFP process. Since you're doing that, negotiating price is, I think, perfectly allowable. With an RFP, when you go over 35,000, you're required to go through an RFP process. When you're doing that, and then the state statute on special districts, of which TBARTA is one and PSTA is another, allows special district to piggyback onto the existing contract of another special district, which is what we would be doing here. We don't have to do our own RFP because PSTA did one for the exact same type of service, and we just want to use one of their contracts. So it saves the time and cost of doing the RFP. But we have to ultimately go with one of the contracts that they awarded. If we ultimately decided on a contract, if one of the proposers was under 35,000, then what you're doing is you're saying, well, we didn't even need to do the RFP process for this. We could have gotten this contract just through written proposal, and you could actually use the other 7 as examples of other written proposals. I think it gives you more flexibility. But when you go through the RFP and you're piggybacking onto an existing contract, well, price is a component of the existing contract, and it was also a factor when these consultants, when their proposals were reviewed by PSTA and TBARTA. So I think in terms of risk assessment, when you're piggybacking onto existing contractual services, you're really sort of piggybacking onto that contract, and that contract already has, all 7 of those contracts already have price components.
Okay, so that wouldn't be an impediment if Krautheimer was 60 and they didn't negotiate further down. There would be no.
Sure, I think the safest course of action is for Krautheimer and for KL2, which were both over the 35,000. I think the safest course of action is you're looking at that. That is the contract price for one search, because I think these are all term contracts for a course of years, and they do a charge per search. You're really only using one search, so you're talking about one charge. But I think that the safest course of action is to look at that as that's the contract price. Now, when you get for the proposals that are, like for instance, Norlock, that are under the 35,000, I think then you potentially have more flexibility.
Okay. Chair.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, I just would like to bring the conversation back to the fact that we are hiring an executive director for a brand-new agency, and that this person is going to be charged with putting a structure in place, with handling potentially, or, this has got to be somebody that is really, really solid in terms of doing administrative and management and budgeting kind of work. And I think it requires an expertise in transportation work. I don't know, Secretary Gwynn, you're the head of a transportation agency. can you weigh in here on what the skill sets or how important it is that you make sure you use someone that is qualified and experienced and, you know, I don't know. I mean, I know what I'm thinking, but I'm not saying it right.
I guess as far as which recruiter to use, I really don't know about those 3 recruiters, so I'd hate to give an opinion on the qualifications of any one of them. Certainly, you're right, you want to find a good candidate. It's an important job. But I don't have enough knowledge of the 3 to know whether the price, the higher price would get you a better search than the lower one.
I think you can negotiate. I think you can, I think there could be a prioritization. I mean, are you saying that we have to pay them $60, $60,000 because that's in their budget, or you can negotiate that down? I mean, that's not my experience.
What I'm saying is that you're utilizing an existing contract, okay? PSTA is, if they utilize the services of the contractor, they're doing it under the contract, and that attachment A, which shows their price per search, is part of their contract. So presumably PSTA couldn't use Krauthammer and pay them $40,000 for an executive search because it says $60,000 in their contract. That's what I'm saying. That in terms of this, then we were able to forego an RFP process by utilizing PSTA's process, and we're piggybacking onto an existing contract. And what's different here is you're just picking which contract. I don't think there's any restriction to which one you pick. But I think if it's over the threshold amount that requires an RFP, then you're literally piggybacking onto an existing contract, as opposed to negotiating your own contract with your own contract price. And like I said, I think this is, I'm looking at this purely from a standpoint of risk assessment, not where there's anything it's 100% clear cut on this, but just thematically, the way this is operating is you're utilizing their process, you're piggybacking onto their contract, and their contract states an amount per search.
That's not my experience.
I would suggest or recommend or ask for the chair's patience and ask Brad to come up and talk about Krauthammer, since he knows why PSTA chose them and what they bring to the table, if that's allowable.
Yeah, it's purely informational. It's not something that was on the agenda, but it's augmenting our discussion here, so Chair recognizes Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When PSTA did this procurement, I personally was not involved directly in the overall procurement process, but in the end, we struggled with the same thing that Mr. Manuel and Ms. Griffin have just articulated. We looked at this issue and saw that cost, because of the different firms, was having such a dramatic effect on the overall scores when you compared the cost with the technical scores. So that is what ultimately led us not to award to one proposal, but just to award to all 7. That then we could pick and choose per contract. We have worked with all 3 firms here at PSTA, all the 3 firms that you're considering, including Krauthammer. We just finished a recruitment with Krauthammer, and we did ask them for this recruitment, which was not for a executive, it was for a senior level position within our organization. We asked for if we could get any discount off of their proposed price. I think they gave us a really small little discount. They didn't give us too much off of their price, but we did ask them, and I'm sure they would consider that. I'm not sure what the answer would be, but I think that would be fine. As Commissioner Long articulated, Krauthammer is definitely the leader in the transit and even the transportation when you consider air executives, airport executives, and other DOT executives. I have worked with them. They were the ones who hired me here at PSTA 6 years ago. The PSTA hired them. Hart was going to hire them, Krauthammer. KL2 is also very experienced. They lost some of their senior people that had helped me in the past, but they just hired some new folks that are very respected in the industry. And then Renee Narlock is really helpful. She's based in Tallahassee, and She does a lot of work here in Florida, especially for jobs in Tallahassee, state executive of the different departments there. Less transportation experience nationwide like the other two firms, and that clearly shows in the prices.
Thank you, Brad. Secretary Gwynn, I understand you'd like to make a few comments.
I don't know if that's, okay, there you go. Yeah,
John?
I think so.
There you go.
Ray and I spoke briefly yesterday, and we did some research, and it may pertain to how this decision is made. But one of the things we were looking at was, of course, we have the legislation that provided the $1 million in funds for next year. But it was fairly specific, and hopefully maybe Cameron can weigh on this as well. I'm not an attorney, but I spoke to our attorney, and I'd be interested in your opinion as well. The way that the language is written, the bill itself pertains to the development of the plan. That's what the money primarily is there for. And it refers to the appropriations project number 524, which lays out how that money is intended to be used. And it lays it out, it was actually pretty specific. It has $56,000, or actually it's almost $200,000 in salary and benefits that can be used for staff that are working on that study or overseeing that study. It's got $600,000 for the acquisition of a consultant to do the study. And then there's $200,000 of what's categorized as expenses, equipment, travel, supplies, other. And under the description of that, it says accounting and legal fees, bank charges, marketing, office supplies, rent, and utilities. And so first I checked with our legal staff to see whether state money can be used for recruiters, and they confirmed that it can be. But their concern is the way this is written, there's nowhere in this $1 million where it would allow us to use that for recruiting expenses. And I did ask them to check further with our central office legal staff to see whether they concurred. The concern is we wouldn't be able to get it through Department of Financial Services to be reimbursed for it. I don't know, Cameron, if you had a chance to look through this, but that was the concern that they had. So if there was going to be, if their interpretation is correct, if we can't use that money, then we have to find some other source of funds, whether it be the funds that come from the counties or something else, but it may not be possible to use this money, which could impact how much we want to or be able to spend. The other thing I just thought of, I don't know if this is legal in the procurement process or not, but could you, if you knew you wanted to keep under a certain amount, could you ask those firms to say, what could you do for this amount? And then that would give you an idea of, three proposals under the procurement amount for RFP. The price is the same for everybody, and you see what you get for that amount. Just a thought.
Mr. Secretary, I haven't specifically reviewed, I'll say this, in general I concur with what your legal office was saying, which is that if what the funds can be used, they're programmed for certain purposes, and so in general, if it's outside what it's being programmed for, you couldn't use for that purpose. That said, I haven't looked at the specific description for the funds, but in general, yes, that's also true. The point, if the amount of the consultant contract was under the threshold where we would have to go through an RFP, you're getting written proposals from anybody who's interested in doing the work, and that's sufficient for this board to make a choice, provided you're under that threshold to launch your own RFP. You could always do that. You're not constrained by the competitive bidding process. Basically, what you'd just be looking at is, here's their qualifications. They want to do it for $34,000, $32,000, whatever, and you could just weigh those options to decide which one you wanted to do. It's the threshold amount of $35,000 that carries into the RFP process, is which moves you into the piggybacking under state statute.
Okay, well, that said, would it be possible then to contact these firms and negotiate and see if they were willing to even consider doing it for under that threshold? That would seem the common sense approach to do it.
I don't think I wouldn't have any concern with basically putting out feelers to see what firms are interested in doing this work, and as long as it's under that threshold, I think you have a lot more freedom to, because in that point, what you're doing is this board's just entering into its own contract. You're not piggybacking onto an existing contract. You're taking written proposals and you're entering into basically drafting and entering into your own contract for services.
I'd like to make a motion.
Kathleen.
I would like to move, if this is on, that the chair of the policy or the chair of the board meet with Krauthammer and KL2 to negotiate a viable path for who's got the best option in terms of price being at a 10% factor of the of the proposal. I mean, I have done what I'm understanding you can't do in Tallahassee, where you get 4 or 5 bidders and, and I agree with that you can negotiate the price. They put a price in a proposal, you can come back and say, this is how much money we have. So I've participated in that, I've seen it done, and so I don't know where the rules have changed since I left Tallahassee, but, and I also think that the technical score should by far outweigh this is, as Commissioner Long was saying, this is a new job. Thank you to the governor and the legislature, which I hope the meeting started off with somebody saying that for the funding. A strong signal from the legislature in terms of support for what we're trying to do here regionally. And we've got to get the right person to negotiate this. I mean, we've just spent 30 minutes talking about a fee between, say $40,000 and $60,000 for somebody to come and sort of put some life behind this footprint and make it real and get this region working as a region in terms of some of these regional transit opportunities. So I think that we're not going to be able to negotiate this with a 10-person board or however many people we have, and we have to designate. The policy committee went through the analysis. I've worked with Krauthammer. They are tremendous. I worked with them in New York, and I worked with them in Tallahassee, and I've seen the result of their work. I think you do need to have somebody with a national footprint experience to get the right talent. And KL2 I've not worked with, but I've heard very positive things about. And those were the 2 highest people on a technical score, so I just think from a next step perspective, we should, whether it be the chair of either the policy committee or meet with them, see what we can negotiate, and because we got to get going. I mean, this is another month will go on, and we're not going to have somebody in this position until the fall, and we're going to get this $1 million, and we're missing federal opportunities, and this could go on for another 6 or 8 months. So I think balancing all of those factors that we talked about yesterday at the policy committee meeting. That's the background of my motion.
And I second that long motion.
And I just want to make one friendly amendment. When you say meet, I assume phone conference is acceptable. And I will say that Greg Moser, who I personally talked to at least 1 or more principals of all 7 entities prior to the policy committee meeting, some of them multiple times, and Greg Moser, and then it was Al Schwim and John, I am not even going to try and say his last name, from KL2 Connects, but they were easy to get a hold of and schedule phone conferences given that they both are outside the state of Florida. So it would be easy enough to either do that again and talk about price further and or to pass that information along to the person designated by the chair to set those up.
Meet is,
Accepting that.
I'm accepting that.
I have another friendly amendment that I would like to offer, and I'm not sure I'll put it in the right words, but I know Kathleen will help me or somebody. Because, we don't have a large staff here at TBARTA to do all the legwork that normally in an agency your staff would be doing all of that and bringing you the recommendation and it would be done. And given that we've made a motion to designate our policy chair and our chair to meet with or talk to or interview the principals of the one firm or Krauthammer, right?
Krauthammer and or KL2.
And or KL2. Is it possible that they can do that and then make a decision on behalf of the board, since bringing the recommendation back again is going to cause another hour-long discussion with probably you cannot do this with this many people and reach a decision, I don't think.
That was assumptive in my motion, that they would negotiate best price, best value, and
get going.
Yeah.
Is the motion, just for clarification purposes, both Melanie and I, or is it her?
I don't know what's
or
I would say either both if that's possible under the sunshine. If it's not possible in the sunshine, then somebody you designate. We have two members of the board.
Should be the chair.
I think it would, I'm glad you brought up Cindy. I think it's going to complicate it in that we can both do it, is my understanding, as long as it's properly noticed, and it would add an additional layer to getting our schedules, getting theirs, properly noticing it. So I think it's
I
going
would
to.
just say the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can get you the information.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so there's been an amendment to the motion. Is there a second to the
Yes.
amendment?
Oh, I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment? Cliff?
If we're gonna piggyback on the contracts that have already been selected, and there's structure in place for how they were selected, and we're not going through a procurement process, we're just picking a contract and going with it. I felt uncomfortable stepping into that contract and changing it immediately, scope and fee. However, if we decide we want to spend under 35, and that's the budget, there's nobody on the 7 contractor list that we can't approach. Because we're now going to tell them we're going for an under 35 contract, and if they're interested in working with us on that contract, any of the 7 can. Because you're just structuring a contract for under 35, and you're doing it with the most 3 qualified people that are on the list, which would be KL2, Krauthammer, and Narlock. But to step into an existing contract and change the scope immediately, I'm not used to that. That's not the way we procure business. I would feel uncomfortable if I was that consultant, stepping into that arrangement, knowing that I'd put in a contract, I'd been selected, another agency wants to piggyback on that contract and immediately change my scope and fee. So to me, it's either an under 35 where price can be considered as an important component of the discussion and negotiations, or if we're over 35 and piggybacking on an existing contract list, we should respect those contracts.
How did PTSA pick 7 members and then they negotiated the price off of recent search?
They asked for a discount and they got it, and no one challenged it. I'm not saying it's not done. I'm just not saying it's appropriate.
We're not changing the
And then,
scope.
and our attorney said risk assessment, so what we're talking is risk assessment.
We're not changing the scope of what they're doing, we're just changing their fee.
Well, you're supposed to change the scope. That's even worse. If you ask them just to give you a discount, I mean, what you're supposed to do when you negotiate a scope is lessen the amount of things they do for less money, not just ask them to give, arbitrary amount off with no scope change.
Two thoughts. One is, I was wondering, Kathleen, is there any attorney that is still employed in Tallahassee government that you worked with that was familiar with this process that might be an additional legal mind that could be consulted about this? Because like Cameron said, it's gray, so, I respect his opinion, but that doesn't mean that there isn't someone. So think on that and noodle on that. And then my second thought, similar but different to Cliff's, is that my understanding, although if we want another point of information, it could be corrected, is that when Mr. Miller said that there was a small discount, in my head, just based on industry standards, I could be wrong, but it went to a discount likely of $6,000 or less. And where I got that is a lot of times entities will give quote unquote 10% if asked. And so I could be wrong about that amount, but point being is that if there was a challenge regarding negotiating with these 2 entities to the exclusion of the others that were over 35, my concern would be that if I am correct about not that $6,000 isn't a lot, but it's not a lot compared to a litigation budget, that you would be, that it wouldn't be worth the risk. That we'd be, I'm kind of
That's a point well taken.
It's not a lot of money, for the risk we'd be taking
Before
on.
the entire board speculates on some things that I think council could probably cut to the chase and advise us on. The last thing we want is a bid protest or something like this, or to get into a situation where we open up to some other kind of liability. Cameron, any thoughts on this?
Oh, and just in reference to what I just said, I think only one of the other 7 besides KL2 and Krauthammer were over the threshold anyway, and that one was, I think, 38. So in the end, what you'd be looking at is any of the consulting firms that do this type of work that is willing to do it for under the trigger RFP threshold amount, this board can just negotiate its own contract with, and you can treat the other proposals, all of them that are under 35, as written estimates for the same work, because they're willing to do it for that amount. So it's really ultimately how you want to communicate with the two named firms, if Ms. Griffin can do it, and if she is ultimately a secure agreement that they're willing to do it for some amount that's underneath that threshold, you could direct. I could work on a draft agreement that could then be presented to you, and it could basically come before the full board, and it could be entered into. Because it just gives you full discretion once you're under that amount to use these written estimates and decide on whoever you want. As I noted before, I think it's the risk just comes into once you get over the 35,000. That's what creates it with these with the listed contract prices. As far as the discount, I mean, if one party ends into contract with another and one of the parties is willing to reduce their price just arbitrarily, I mean, of course, that's a thing that happens. I think the risk more is along the lines of the other proposers say, well, I would have listed my price even lower if you'd asked me. I mean, that sort of situation. The challenger wouldn't be the firm that is doing the work for you and then is giving you the discount. It would be any of the others that would somehow feel like they didn't get the chance to do the same thing. It's sort of a competitive disadvantage.
Well, that was my concern.
Cameron, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't mean to speak out.
Go ahead.
It's for further clarification for my perspective. If we wanted to continue with the policy committee's top-ranked and most qualified firms, 3 of them, and we did rank them in order of qualification, and if we are seeking an under 35 contract, there's nothing that would prevent us from talking to each of those qualified firms and asking them if they would negotiate under 35 with us, and it's just a yes or no. For all 3 firms, we can start with the most qualified. If they say no, we could go to the second most qualified based on the policy input, and then see if we can get an under 35 contract. Once we're under 35, I don't think we have a risk.
Yes, as I see it, once you're under 35, what that does is it sort of untethers you from the RFP requirement. And that once that's done, then the way that the firms were selected, the scoring, all those things really have less bearing because you just have much more discretion on how you do it. So once you're sort of untethered from the RFP requirement, any of these firms could have done this work for you as long as it's under the threshold amount.
And I agree, and could we include that in the motion? That our target would be under 35? Is that possible?
I think the only person we're gonna end up with is that Renee.
Well, what it was potentially, but one point of clarification is that it seems that our risk would be with doing this would be minimized if the board were to take a vote that these are the 3 entities that we are now exclusively considering, and that the other 4, due to their technical scores, regardless of what they would have done with price, we would have never considered. Does council agree? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
I understand it doesn't completely eliminate it, but it seems like it would minimize it if we made it clear on the record, if that is the board vote, that these are the now exclusively the 3 that we'd be interested in regardless.
I mean, I think you could do that, but I guess in my mind, I don't necessarily think that you have to, because if any of them are willing to do it for under the 35,000, this board has full discretion to look at those written estimates and make a choice. I don't think once you're under that threshold that any of the other proposals have any sort of right to challenge based on price because you're out of the RFP at that point.
I see.
I would just respond to that, Melanie, I think it's well taken, and the considerations are not purely legal. They're also, let's get this process moving along. So you folks on the policy committee, and thank you for all your great work, have said these are the 3 we recommend. I honestly think we should focus on them and not go far afield and the economy of time to interview all these other firms would be my point. Betsy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the motion. You're trying to negotiate with these top 2 ranked, as I understand it. You did rank them in terms like a CCNA. You're looking at qualifications. You're not looking at cost perspective, as I understand it. But now we're trying to get them under 35,000, and the risk is the top 2 that we've ranked that are clearly higher, they're going to say no, and we're going to end up with the 3rd, which is the 3rd ranked, and that may be fine, but it's a little bit confusing because if we'd known we had a budget of 35,000, it might have been a different to start with, a different type of negotiation. B, we're hearing we can't use the funding per se for this search, so the assumption is that we have $35,000 in the budget somewhere to do this. I haven't heard that yet, actually. And I would like to hear that in fact, that we can come up with $35,000 in our current budget to pay for this. And, you know, if I understand the motion to be that that's what we're trying to do, is to negotiate with the top two and see if they'll get below 35,000. And why they would, I'm not sure. But if that's the motion, then I understand it.
My motion was to get them to best value, not necessarily below 35, so.
Yeah,
I think you really slide down, when you go from 662 to 618, from a skill set perspective in terms of the ability to attract the right talent. But
And budget-wise, I'd like to hear
What was the?
from Ray, do we have any problem at this point? If we get a 10% discount on our top rank, do we have the funding to pay for that?
Well, we'll have to find it from some type of funding that's available to us. I mean, I thought that the million, you know, the way it described the operations of the office and all that, that would be considered. I can't answer that, you know, immediately.
The $1 million is not going to be available until August anyway.
Right, that's the
concern.
And that would be on JPAs that we have with the Department of Transportation.
And I see my esteemed colleague Seal, Karen Seal, a little incredulous over there, and I recognize her because I mean, she's been wanting to make a comment.
And thank you, Betsy. You were going after what I've been kind of sitting here going, do we have the money or not? Do we have $60,000 or do we have $35,000? You know, that's got to dictate at this point where we go.
I don't want to slow this down, but as a point of my understanding, based on my research to date, and these are not conclusive answers, but my understanding is that even if the $1 million is available, because it doesn't become available until after August 1st, and the way the state rules are in terms of not starting work until funding is available, that the earliest we'd be able to technically have someone start work is after it's approved at our August 24th meeting, which essentially puts you into September. So while my point is that while I certainly want to move this along as quickly as possible, if now that we have had this initial discussion, if we want to get additional information regarding A, funding, and B, conversations, whether it be by myself or Chair Holton, with these three entities about their ultimate price, I think we do have the luxury of one extra month to do that. I can come back to you with more information in April. Again, I'm not trying to slow it down, but I think we're already stymied anyway by the state funding.
Well, the issue,
unless my understanding is wrong.
The issue is whether it's technically available for purposes of the statute, even though it's not going to be funded until such a time. So if it's available, some of these firms could potentially negotiate a deferred payment or a structure whereby they're paid after the money is available. So the definition really hinges on, and again, I hate to boil this down into legal discussions, but the definition depends on if the money is technically available now, and I would defer to Cameron and Secretary Gwynn on that, because I'm not sure that it really is, and that's an issue.
Mr. Chair, for clarification and to move it forward, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Could we possibly vote on that motion and then speak about the funding and require in the dictate we are making to you to talk with the Krauthammer, that you also boil down how much money we actually have at PSTA and work from there to figure it out how to pay Krauthammer. I don't think we should try to do this on the cheap. I think we're making a big mistake for our region, and clearly, in listening to everyone talking here, we're not going to figure this out with this many people having an opinion. We know we need the money. We know that Krauthammer is the best. Can we try to work to see how we figure out how to do that? Yes or no? And is it possible that we can ask, since our policy chair brought it up, could we ask the attorney for PSTA, who was obviously involved in all of the hiring as we've gone forward, then to give us an opinion about whether or not we can do what I just said? Because if we delay this for another month, we're just pushing the can down the street and ruining our credibility, in my mind.
Betsy?
Well, I don't see a problem with the motion. I mean, the motion is really just to see if they're gonna negotiate and where we're gonna be price-wise, and we've got to know that anyways. I don't see any problem with that. But we certainly do need to figure out what the budget is that we're gonna have
Absolutely.
before we enter into anything. So I don't, if I understand the motion correctly, all we're doing is negotiating with or talking to the top 2 ranked firms at this time to see what their flexibility on the fee is, right?
And the two can happen concurrently.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So I
Call the
vote.
question.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are voting this, I will call the question on the amendment to the motion. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The amendment.
Nay.
I'm gonna say nay too.
All right, why don't we just, for the purposes of the record, then, Sue, call the roll?
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Melanie Griffin,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Nay.
Mike Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Nay.
Commissioner Benak,
Aye.
Commissioner Starkey,
Aye.
Commissioner Seal,
Aye.
Kathleen Shanahan,
Aye.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
You have 8 yeses and 2 noes.
Okay, so the amendment passes on the original motion. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we will proceed to work with council and staff in terms of doing that as expeditiously as possible to reach out to these firms and see where they're at. And then I cannot underscore enough the need to make this decision at our next board meeting and move as quickly as possible, subject, of course, to the funding availabilities. But I think we have to explore that and pin that down and get a real cohesive package together on this.
Just one question before moving on. My understanding, Chair Holton, is that the board has tasked you, not me, with making these calls. I will get information to staff to just make sure they have all the correct contact details for you. And at this point in time, unless I miss something, you will communicate to staff if we need a policy committee meeting before the next board meeting, because I'm not necessarily hearing anything presently that we would discuss.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen.
Can I ask one final question
Sure.
before we move on? And Ray, if you don't have the information now, you can provide it to us later. You know, it's obvious that we cannot use this $1 million appropriation. So the bottom line is, do we have money in our budget, or can we not do some services and be able to budget this? We need to know, I think, what we can afford and what we can't.
Well, I think we need probably to have a meeting of the finance committee and go over where we are and what monies we can use. That's why the local funding is so important to the agency, because that's the only money that has any discretion.
Right.
But, you know, we won't get the next group of that until sometime after October.
When's your next finance committee meeting?
We're gonna set one up for this purpose.
I'm sorry?
We haven't set it up yet. We're
Okay.
going to do that.
Well, I would make a motion that you have a finance
Yeah.
committee meeting expeditiously.
Right.
Second.
Any discussion?
I do have one comment on that, Mr. Chair. So, as I understood the funding that comes through the $1 million that goes back into our agency, there are going to be things that it does cover.
Correct.
That currently could shift some money from one place to another and free up some money for our selection search.
That could be
even though it
possible,
doesn't pay
yes.
for it directly.
Right.
But there are a lot of things listed that can be funded that you're currently paying for under your general revenue.
Well,
We have to look
yes.
at it.
But we have to look at it, because there's still very strict things on, like the CAP program, which most of our money comes from, we can't use for that.
So when we meet, we need both of those. We need, how we're spending our money and then
Right.
some of the things that could fund
Right.
for that discussion. Thank you.
Betsy?
Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, those of you who've been on the finance committee for a while know the challenges that we have for coming up with anything that's overhead, given the grant funding that we have and the limitations on what we can spend the money on. So it is going to be a challenge, and so we do need to take a look at this and see if there are things that can be deferred until after the other funding is available, given that I know in advocating for that funding, that was one of the points that we made, that we cannot just continue to operate and be successful if we're going to have to just keep going under the administrative funds, which each, commuter assisted grant. We're just never going to be able to achieve our goals if that's what we're limited by. So it's just a question of whether or not when we can pay something and how we can, make sure that it's consistent with our budget, as well as need to have a copy of the appropriation bill to see, and maybe even, if you have anything in writing opinion-wise and what it can be spent on and what it can't be. I think that's going to be necessary for this Finance Committee meeting.
Yeah, and Betsy, you as chair, you have the authority to schedule that, and I think we're in agreement even without a motion that we do that immediately as soon as practicable to get that done. And I would encourage everyone that is not on the Finance Committee to participate in a call and listen to that as well, so we're all informed on that. All right, so thank you, Melanie, for that long and but thorough and productive report. Anything else to report from the Policy Committee?
No, and if we don't meet this month, it'll be a shorter report next month.
All right. Next up is Rick Homans on the regional transit perspective.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So Rick Homans, I'm the CEO of the Tampa Bay Partnership, and just want to spend a few minutes and kind of move from this granular level that we're at to about a 30,000-foot level, and talk a bit about, from the partnership and business leadership perspective, why we are seeing such a sense of urgency about the work that is in front of you. And reinforcing what you've just talked about, the need to move forward with this search as expeditiously as possible. Just real briefly, and the business leadership has identified transportation, regional transit as a #1 priority. 18th largest metropolitan area in the country. We are last on the list in terms of transit supply and ridership. And at the same time, we are expecting 620,000 new residents by 2025. So while our congestion numbers this morning, excepting this morning, are really not that bad compared to a number of other communities that we compare ourselves to, with the growth that's anticipated, we are looking at some serious gridlock in the future, and we have to pursue all kinds of different mobility options. Two facts I want to put in front of you is in terms of why this is so critical. Out of the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the country, we are 93rd in terms of access to jobs. As you look in Tampa Bay in the 4-county area, only 16% of the population can access a job within 90 minutes on using public transit. So 84% 90 minutes or over, which basically makes it inaccessible. What we have seen in the last 2 years that we've been really engaged with this is the convergence of 3 different tracks. One is political power, #2 is infrastructure investment, and #3 is a transit plan. So very briefly, I just want to talk to you about these 3 things. #1 is political power, and rests largely in Tallahassee, in our state legislature, and you only see this when you step back from the region and you look at Tampa Bay as a market and as a region. These last 2 years, we've had the Speaker of the House from Pasco County, Richard Corcoran. The next 2 years, we have the President of the Senate, Senator Bill Galvano from Manatee County and from Southern Hillsborough. And the 2 years after that, we have Representative Chris Sprowls from Pinellas, who will be Speaker of the House, and we have Senator Wilton Simpson from Pasco Hernando Citrus, who will be President of the Senate. You look at that lineup, and it speaks to the need to the ability to do something transformative, something major, something one time, and that's transportation. You see on this slide 2324, and I put that up there because it's very interesting that after Tampa Bay steps off the stage, the political stage of the power and control in Tallahassee, Jacksonville steps up on it. Senator Travis Hudson will be the Senate President, and Representative Paul Renner will be the Speaker of the House. And we are going to see, I can pretty much guarantee you in those 2 years, we are going to see how a community in Florida takes advantage of the power that it's got in Tallahassee, because that community has its act together politically and is working today on a plan to take advantage of being in that position. So that's an opportunity, and 21, 22, it's gone, and it'll be a long time before we have that in front of us again. So that's political power. Infrastructure investment. You know, as of a few years ago, under the name of TBX, now TB Next, Tampa Bay Next. What we view there is this is the state, Secretary Gwynn, FDOT, the governor, saying we are prepared to invest several $1 billion in the transportation infrastructure of Tampa Bay. We got to figure out how to do it, but there's some major investments that need to be made, and we're prepared to do that. Key features of the Howard Franklin are the interchange reconstructions around the airport and downtown, and the introduction of managed lanes wherever they may go. But those are the core components of the plan. But big picture is the state saying during this same period that we've got the political power, we're prepared to invest billions of dollars into Tampa Bay. At the same time, and I really viewed what happened with TBX as being somewhat fortuitous, pumping the brakes and resetting and slowing it down, because it gave the opportunity for this transit plan that was funded by FDOT to move forward. And now we're just at the right time. Coming out of that plan is a recommended catalyst project, and that very nicely integrates with the infrastructure investment. So the timing of it, it's in a condition, it's followed a process where it's ready to move forward into a planning, project development, and construction phase. So those are the three pieces that we've got: political power, infrastructure, and a transit plan that's ready to go. Just reinforcing, number one, why this is so important. We are one region, we're interconnected, we're interdependent, and these circles here show how. The circle in the center of these Venn diagrams show you that's the people that work and live in that particular county, but around that are people that are either coming into the county to work from another one or going out. And so you can see here, there's an incredible sense of interdependence on one another. The other thing I want to put in front of you is we've talked, and this goes back to the political discussion, that Central Florida has had its turn at the table, that South Florida has had its turn at the table, now it's Tampa Bay's turn. Well, this slide quantifies what that means. Tri-Rail, Sunrail, the Catalyst premium transit projects, and those two other metropolitan areas of Florida. FDOT has put in about $700 million to both of them. That's basically unmatched money. And these are not present-day values, so they'd be a lot higher. But if you look at the Sunrail in particular, which is the equivalent of kind of a CSX project here, $432 million for right-of-way was written by the state. $189 million in operating expenses over 7 years, written by the state. And then the state actually loaned, is my understanding, the $153 million of local money to the local governments in order to get the match to go to the federal government for the $300 million. So there was $600 million of a grant, between federal, state, and local, but a considerable amount of state money put in. And you see the same thing, and the tri-rail numbers are pretty, very conservative, because there's a number of numbers we were not able to obtain about the state support for that. So the equivalent is, to date, Tampa Bay is 0. And that's where we see that we have this opportunity right now. And to us, the choice is very clear. The rest of 18 and into 19, through October of 19, there are 2 very critical planning processes underway. There's the Tampa Bay Next Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, where Secretary Gwynn and his team and his contractors are figuring out how to move forward with Tampa Bay Next. And that project is either going to incorporate a transit component, like a bus rapid transit, or not. And I know that, I think Secretary Gwynn would agree, they can't wait until the end of 2019 to figure out, to hear that answer. They need to know pretty darn soon, because that planning process is underway as we speak. There are dozens of people working on it, and they need to know whether to build this into it or not. And those options will come forward towards the latter half of 19, around October. There's also, at the same time, the long-range transportation plan process that the MPOs is underway right now in Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County. Those come forward. They will all have, for the first time ever, a section on a regional priority or priorities, and that will be the same in each one of them, and we're hoping that this project would be the project that would appear in each one of their long-range transportation plans. Again, that's a public process. It needs discussion, it needs votes, and the intention there is in October or November of 19 that those votes would take place by those respective MPOs, and then that would go into the FDOT work plan, and we would see that the 2020 session of the legislature is when we would make an ask and move into the FDOT budget for the years, through 2024, when we think that this project could take place in that time frame. So if we miss these 2 planning cycles, if we're not in the TB Next plan, if we're not in the MPOs, if we miss the 20 work plan and miss the 20 session, then we're basically back to ground zero in terms of figuring out what do we do with regional transit. So there's a great sense of urgency, in our opinion, to keep this process moving forward as expeditiously as possible. We appreciate very much the commitment of each and every one of you to putting the time and the resources into this project to make it work, and we stand ready to support you as business leaders in whatever way that we can do that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick? I'd just like to make a comment, and I want to underscore the urgency of what you have said, because I think there will be a confluence of the right folks in Tallahassee to get something meaningful done for the Tampa Bay region. In the next 2 years, I think there will also be potentially infrastructure money from Washington that will flow our way if we are ready for that and can handle it. So that said, we all have to work very hard and think bold and think, this catalyst project, but also be thinking about other projects that we can get in the pipeline to take advantage of it.
Right.
We cannot just be linear thinkers. We have to be bold, broader thinkers and encompass a lot of different options, within our laundry list of things and wants that we want to ask for. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add too on that, we did spend this Monday and Tuesday in Washington with members of the delegation, with the FTA acting administrator and others, and we heard a great receptivity to the plan that's being developed here. Also spent a lot of time in Tallahassee over this last session talking with the leaders who were on this chart, and I would say they are inviting us to come forward and very receptive to the plans that are underway. So there's a very welcoming kind of reception at the other end, but this is the plan that they like, and they're encouraging us to continue with it and bring it forward.
Thank you. Other questions? Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Chair will now recognize Ray.
I just want to build upon what was just stated by Rick. I think this is our time, and having been around here a long time, we really do need to move forward. I just want to give you a quick update on where we are with the plan now, and what we're presenting to the public. Scott and I have been spending a lot of time together going out and answering questions with chambers and different groups. And I'm going to give it more from a planner's perspective than an engineer's, just giving you some information. I think it's important that you all are going to be able to speak to this plan, because you're going to get questions as it gets more and more attention in the press. And I did, the Times had a good article in the paper this morning that you have a copy of at your desk that was, I thought, very positive. I think we have to remind people what the plan's purpose is. It's a regional transit vision, and it's a catalyst. It's not the whole thing. There's other projects on there, and we've talked about that, the importance. It's not a replacement for future transit projects. So we need to have people understand that this is not an end in itself, and it doesn't mean these other projects can't happen in the future. When this whole region is done, I want to talk about some of the other projects on here, like Highway 19, doing something on there, on the Veteran Suncoast, on 41, on the CSX, not only the one that was talked about, within the city of Tampa, but throughout the regions. These are all possibilities. For our neighbors to the south, the possibility of doing something across the Skyway, down I-75, down 301, with this type of flexible type of transit is certainly possible in the future, as it is going north farther into Pasco and into Hernando. These are all projects that are part of this long-term vision that we can pick from to add on. And when we're done with this, you can see the numbers, that a lot of people are affected in a very positive way. All kinds of modes are involved, even ferries are involved in looking at this, so it's not, again, just limited to one thing. Flexibility, we're in a disruptive period now. We have to face facts that we don't know in 10 years exactly where we're going to be. We have an idea with autonomous vehicles and all this. This plan does give that kind of flexibility for the future. Again, we started with 5 alternatives. You know what we ended up with. The cost of the 5 alternatives, or what we ended up with, was none of these 5, but something that kind of used different things to really come up with a hybrid plan. And I have to tell you, a lot of people think the plan was set. When I went in to Jacobs, I really had no idea what they were going to present. And I think it was very creative, because it used highway infrastructure to help pay for transit. And I think that's one of the most important things about this plan that's attractive to Washington, to the state, that we're double using things instead of doing a separate plan. Again, all these ideas, are we going to have 21 stations? We don't know. This is where the public can participate and really say what changes need to be made. And that's the process we're about to go in very soon. Again, 20 miles of this are already dedicated with the shoulders, the other Shares Express toll lanes, and then some general purpose lanes, but that's something that could be discussed too. Options for separation, we've seen a lot of different ideas here. There are very many ways to look at this. This is, again, the public can participate in this and tell us what they want. Street level stations certainly can be a part of this, as can other bus rapid transit systems that plug into this, like, for example, on Florida Avenue or Tampa Street, or going out to the Brandon area, or going to Clearwater, connecting in the airport in Tampa. There's lots of projects in this whole plan that can be looked at. Going through it very quickly, you have the shoulder lanes going up from downtown St. Pete to Gateway, the first part using the Central Avenue BRT. You have the toll lanes across the bridge. You have the ability with the intermodal center of either taking this exactly to the airport or connecting it with some other form of transit. You have the ability, again, in the center of the interstate between West Shore and Tampa, having its own total lanes, and then getting back on farther north to go up through the north part of Tampa and be in the shoulder lanes again. But these are things, that can be discussed as we go through the public process. Intermodal center options, what kind of stations do we want? So there's a lot for the public to participate in this and kind of give us an idea of what they want to see happen. Again, the streetcar study in Tampa, this could connect to this, and this could be the circulator for this to circulate throughout downtown Tampa and Ybor City. Again, going north, we go into Pasco County, and I'm sure that if shoulder lanes are needed on the part north of Bears at some point in the future, that can be added. Right now, the traffic counts really, those lanes are pretty free-flowing and can be used as general purpose lanes. But again, these are all things we need to talk about a lot over the next 6 months. Again, you know, we have a project that's between $380 million and $455 million as a first catalyst project to a lot of other projects. This isn't going to solve all our problems. Again, we have other projects that we looked at that are feasible, like the CSX, to look at in the future. That takes a little longer. Doesn't mean we shouldn't start working on it and looking at it now. And, you know, some of the stats for that project. Again, this seems to me, the experience I have in this area, is the best, fastest way to move forward, to time it with our political clout in the state, and to really be the beginning of a transit system that may be a model for other parts of the country, because we're doing it in a different way. And we have gold standards aspirations, as you know, and we're not talking about regular buses. Express buses are fine, but having ridden on express buses in the HART system, if you're on that bus more than 45 minutes, it's not comfortable. You need some better form of transit to get choice riders and better times. And I think this type of technology certainly can provide that. And stations and flexibility for the future of autonomous vehicles, and tying in with other projects we have going on in the area right now. So right now we're in one. We got to talk about how it's going to be funded, obviously. That discussion needs to begin. As we move forward. The community vetting of the draft plan is going to start fairly soon in April, and begin to incorporate those public comments we have into the plan. And I'll answer any questions you have. Scott is here. If you want to get into the weeds, he can answer questions on that. Thank you.
Any questions for Ray? Ray, one question I had that has come up just structurally, given the lag time before we get our $1 million funding, I anticipate there might be some other engineering type issues done, and I was going to ask Secretary Gwynn too, can we rely on D&T to, you know, to provide one of your engineers or advisors to help us in some of those matters as we progress through this process? I don't think, obviously, we're not going to get to PD&E or anything like that yet. We're still going to need some engineering issues that we don't have the resources until we get staffed up to do that.
We'll continue to assist. The other thing is, I did find, Ray, we had talked about when the money would be available. We can set up an agreement that could be approved before. I know we don't have a board meeting in July, so if in June we approve the JPA, it could be contingent upon July 1st funding becoming available. Then you can access it July 1. Just a form of encumbrance that we would do. So July 1, it will be. We'll continue to be a resource.
Okay. Kathleen.
Is this, first of all, thanks for the update.
Sure.
Is the update on our website? Are we seeking
I
participation?
believe that it is, yes, yes.
Okay. And do we put out like you'll put out a press release today saying, because I do think that this isn't updated from the other one, even though the front page looks the same. And so when people, they're going to see the date. But I mean, I think we need to continue promote as we get more intelligence and more information and more feedback from the public. These are all being updated. Right. Technology is moving, a lot of things are moving, and this is a good snapshot in terms of what's happening out there. So even though we're using the same screenshot, which is fine, we need to say updated information available, blah, 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 and then whoever you guys distribute this out to, I don't know who's on your database list, but I would push this out and seek for people to either blog, write an op-ed, participate in the public debate, remind them of the schedule of the public meetings. I mean, we have to be actively seeking public comment and engagement. And I think this letter that somebody put on our desk this morning, I'd not read the paper. I did have a meeting with Paul Tash the other day. And this is a nice little, sort of affirmation from definitely a reflection of different business groups in terms of phase one. It's a start. We have to get started. So I just think that the more that we can do with information, and I mean, pushing it out. Don't sit and wait for people to find it. Like, use all the vehicles, the downtown chamber, so I just want to make sure, I know we have a small staff, but if you have it all lined up in your screens, you should be able to push it with buttons and ask these people to stay engaged in the debate.
We are definitely trying to do that, and any presentation Scott has, I've gone with him, so we're working.
No, I know that, but I'm on all these lists and I don't see enough of this.
As far
as, I'm telling you, I'm not getting, I have a Google Alerts, I have all this stuff. I'm going to all the meetings, but I usually see a lot of the information flow around, especially around this topic, because I'm pushing it in my own way, and so I just am telling you, we're not doing enough out there. Not necessarily the meetings, online, technologically.
Right.
I see, similar but different. I know that you have all the social media platforms like Twitter. I'm impressed you even have an Instagram. Are you pushing this information out via your social media channels in addition to, I know you have a vibrant listserv as well as your website?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is right now, Scott, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but they're planning like a major event to kick off what this next section is in April. And that's when, I think we're going to have everything kind of locked down even better. And then that's probably when we would really push it out then.
Okay, and I just want to make sure, I mean, I think it's great that we have these channels, and similar to Kathleen, there are these statistics that, certain demographics don't actually read listservs anymore. They're solely getting their news from social media. It's easy, you click on it, and so I think if we're getting it out via all of them, it'll make it, and it's even easier then to share it with your own networks if you choose to do so and get more public engagement.
Right.
Can we hear about the launch date though, so we can calendar it and get excited?
Good morning, Scott Pringle with Jacobs Engineering. What we've been doing in March is essentially a soft launch and talking with all our stakeholders. For example, meeting with the chambers, and we've got a lot of great input, and that's where you're seeing some of these new updates. April is when we are going to be pushing out that information to the general public. Hopefully we're going to have a survey out there so people can actually engage in what we're discussing. We had the opportunity to talk about some of the ideas or content of that outreach process at the last TMA meeting. It's last Friday, and then looking towards May, June timeframe for a larger forum conversation, not including just the plan, but other, how all the other different moving parts sort of fits in. So.
How big is our list right now? How big is our email list?
I don't have that specific numbers, but it's large because we are not only working with our internal list as well, but we're coordinating with Hillsborough County on their neighborhood outreach group, PSTA, HART. I mean, we're going to pull everybody's list together and use them all.
TBARTA is approximately 2,000.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so we have a couple thousand, just for ours alone.
Good. Thanks, Scott.
Ray, you finished with that report? You're going to go to your next one?
Okay, just very quickly, we're working with all the agencies involved on that memorandum of understanding. I'm speaking to the Hillsborough MPO Policy Board Monday. And PASCO has already approved, as has Ford Pinellas and PSTA. There's some changes that you have in there that basically just describe the MPO process in a little bit more detail. We don't have problems with those, and we're hoping to come back with a final document to you at the April meeting. So that's our plan there. Just some general other things that we've covered most. I do want to bring up county contributions. Just the discussion we had today hopefully helps you understand why it's critical. I don't believe we would have gotten the $1 million or even been here if we did not get county contributions for the last 3 years that we had not been getting, and we went out and really pounded the pavement and convinced with our van pool program and other things we were providing a good service. That's got to continue. That's our only flexibility right now in the kind of funding we have. As you could see, the other funding is very limited. So I'm ready to send that letter out now and remind the counties that this is one of the reasons we were able to get this money, is because we had local skin in the game. They keep saying that over and over again, and we can't forget that or let that go away in this process. One of the bills that didn't go forward was the idea of allocating $25 million to TBARTA in South Florida. I think that might come back again because that would be a perfect state match for local dollars to actually do this. So I'm hopeful that in next year's legislation, when we get closer to actually implementing something, we can move forward. On our audit, we are going to have an operational assessment done. Mike Millett was very kind to meet with our auditor recently to look at that, so we're working on that for the future to look at some of these financial issues. And we have a lot of new partnerships, getting some in the private sector and public sector, like the City of Tampa St. Pete for our commuter services and our van pool program. We're up to 112 vans now, again from 98 back in January 2017, so we're moving forward, getting some bus riders from some of the heart routes that have been reduced or taken away, so that's worked out good. Working with the schools, that's expanding the number of schools we have. And just want to let you know the future of the region awards for TBRPC is on May 18th. We are going to submit the regional trail plan to that to hopefully be considered for an award. And that is all I have, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Ray? Ray, one comment as well, and I think in the legislation we all read that bed tax dollars are going to be available for transit, which is a wonderful thing. I know folks from this county have been, and all of our counties have been helpful in pushing that. I think that's something that we need to encourage all of our member counties to really look at, and we as a board need to look at accessing some of those tourist development dollars too, because transportation is the lifeblood of tourism and everyone getting around, so it's going to be a very, very valuable thing to do that.
David, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that $5 million and the importance of what level of local commitment we need to have to move to that engineering stage as far as for their share.
Well, there's not a match required, obviously, and TBARTA board will direct us what to study with that $5 million. All we would ask is that hopefully there would be the support from the locals so that we have an opportunity to be successful at the federal level. Without that, we just won't be. So it's not necessarily a formal requirement, but it is something that we would hate to spend $5 million on something that we don't have the support to bring with it to ask for the federal money.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Can I ask one question?
Absolutely.
Is there a clarifying, like, is it expected 20%, or what's the level match that's usually achieved at the federal, to get the federal dollars?
Typically what it would be is we would go in and ask for 50% federal, and there'd be, that along with that would have to go some form of commitment from the local government agencies that would be participating for the 25% capital, and then the commitment to operate and maintain after the system's up and running.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks for those reports. We now turn to other business. One thing I do want to thank the entire board and all of our stakeholders that did call your legislators, call the leadership in Tallahassee to get our appropriations. It was a group effort. I had the opportunity to speak with the governor after he had signed the legislation. He was very enthusiastic and very happy at the way TBARTA was going. Senator Galvano echoed the same thoughts. Chris Sprouls echoed the same thoughts. So I think we really will have a convergence of the stars aligning for us to get some real good positive things done. And again, this is just our first kickoff project. There are many, many more anticipated, and intermodality will be the key. We're not locked into any one solution or mode, and probably a combination of buses, potentially light rail in the future, potentially all kinds of new things, virtual rails. So sky's the limit, so let's take advantage of it. And now I would like to recognize again Brad for some brief comments on your successful trip to Washington.
Thank you. As Mr. Holman said, we had a very fantastic visit to Washington, D.C. earlier this week. The purpose of our trip from Pinellas County, of course, was, number one, to show support for federal funding to support already locked down local and state funding for the Central Avenue BRT project in St. Petersburg as a precursor to then the larger regional premium transit plan. So we had a fantastic large group of folks from Pinellas County that attended with me. And I know this was also done in conjunction with a larger national group of the American Public Transit Association. So there were also representatives from HART and other Florida transit systems, all with a very similar message that it's very traditional for transportation projects to be funded at the local, state, and federal level. The Trump administration has proposed ratcheting down a lot of the transportation pots of money, and we were speaking to Congress specifically about not doing that, but continuing that federal support. And yesterday, or late last night, I guess, the Senate approved the budget, and I read that President Trump is going to sign the 18 budget that does that. That maintains a very strong level of federal support for public transit. Programs that the Trump administration had proposed to zero out, Congress actually increased in the budget, and at least the reports are that President Trump will sign this budget. We,
Yesterday's news.
maybe, I don't know, yeah.
I heard about his tweet this morning,
So specifically, we had a large group, like I said, and I think we were very successful because we had a diverse group of elected officials, of course my own staff, and we had great representatives from our business community. Rick Homans representing the regional business community from the Tampa Bay Partnership, as well as representatives from the St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce and the Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber, which is where our bus rapid transit project, Central Avenue, goes from downtown St. Pete to the beaches. We met with, of course, our own congressional delegation and Congressman Bill Arakis and Congressman Christ and Congresswoman Castor, also with Congressman Ross, Webster, and Mario Diaz-Balart, representative from South Florida, who is very key because he is the chair of the Transportation Appropriations Committee. So his discussion was very short because he was right in the mix of discussing the budget, but he assured us that that we would be protected, or that the overall pot of funding, the New Starts pot of funding, capital investment grant funding, that we would like our bus rapid transit project to come out of, like this premium transit plan would come out of, would be restored, and indeed he was correct. Last year, the budget, well, we're in the middle of fiscal year 18 now. Congress is 6 months late in approving the budget that they just did last night that started on October 1. So the budget that they just approved goes until September 30th of this current year. They will now move, I've heard, immediately into starting to discuss and mark up for federal fiscal year 19. Hopefully, at least the goal would be that they would approve it, which seems, given Congress, maybe unlikely, but approve it before the August recess because nothing is really going to happen after that and the election. So, but that would be fiscal year 19. Again, President Trump has presented a budget for fiscal year 19 that also reduces transportation funding, but Congress has assured and at least shown in this fiscal year 18 budget that they are very positive about continuing to provide investment in all kinds of infrastructure. What we heard from a number of the congressional members was that they seem unlikely to be able to come up with a way to pass a massive a single infrastructure bill, and the thinking now in Congress is that they will pass it in a number of bills, like the budget, like perhaps some other, like water and air and other different bills will have increases in funding, just like this one did for transportation. So the capital investment grant program, which last year only had $2.4 billion in it, is now, as of this morning, $2.64 billion. The question that just came up about what the potential match requirement would be for any project, the Senate or the budget includes language that restricts the federal share for any project to be 51% or less. The Central Avenue BRT project got a very good rating, a medium-high rating, because we actually came up with 51% local and state funding, so the federal share is 49%. Just that little 2% helped us get the feds like that, of course, and so they gave us a medium-high rating. We also met with Senate and House appropriation committee staff, which is so key, as you know. I mean, they are the ones that actually write this language and put this together, And it was very pleasing to see that they know of the Tampa Bay area, they know of PSTA, they know of lots of our reputation as being an area that seeks innovative transportation solutions like partnering with Uber and Lyft or working with autonomous vehicles, et cetera. And they were very positive about that. They said that when people call them all around the country, they point to the Tampa Bay area, and that was very exciting. We met with the FTA administrator, the acting FTA administrator, Jane Williams, about our project and the regional project, and she was very positive about it. Positive about us working together better as a region than we ever have before. And she was specifically the one that made comments about bus rapid transit being a technology, not exclusively, but any technology that can be nimble for the future changes to our transportation technology. It can become autonomous. It can, perhaps be more efficient and adjust its alignment, et cetera. So that was a very, very positive thing, I think, meeting as well. Commissioner Long was a fantastic leader on our trip, as you all know her. She charmed the administrator perfectly, and I was hopeful that maybe she was just going to write a $20 million check right there, almost. But I guess Congress had to vote first. But it was a great trip.
Thanks so much for that. Any questions for Brad? Catherine, do you have a question?
No, that was up before he.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much for that.
I do have a question.
Oh.
One on Ray's list here, it says upcoming meetings, so I'm curious when and where, well, where's our next meeting?
Our next meeting is in Manatee County. It's at the Convention Center, I believe. Is that what it's called on Highway 301, right? Yeah.
And then we're coming to Pasco, right?
Yes.
I'll help you with that. Okay, and then I did want the meetings, I think we need to redo the vote on the minutes because the minutes do not reflect that I was at the last board meeting.
That's correction to the minutes.
Right.
Okay.
I don't recall how you do that, but I need a motion to correct the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any objections? Motion carries.
Thank
you. Any other new business? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned.
I was going to say, before you, I was going to comment that getting down to Manatee County, you will notice there is a huge amount of gridlock. You might want to
go early, yeah.
And
my brother Paul worked with,
Anyway, I knew your name from, I met your dad, and I was going to Google your name. Yeah. Okay, now that's
It was fabulous. Well, thank you. At the risk of you thinking I'm a worse person, no. Here I am presenting yesterday in the same outfit.
Well, we enjoy